Thank you very much.
No, I'm fine, thank you. I'm good, thank you.
40 years I've been calling you Anna Myrtle. You hate it?
Okay, we're good.
I just call her Anna. I don't call her Anna. She hates that word. Are you related? No, but yeah.
Yeah, that's probably good. Watch yourself though.
Yeah, this is good.
Okay, well, we're ready. So I said, no one probably did more preparation for Sam. We were here yesterday at 2:30 to make sure everything was right, and so you know how it happened. So anyway, I think it worked out. So I want to welcome you all, and especially our speaker for the evening. So it's been a pleasure for me to know Sam most of my life. That he graduated in the class of 1989 in Hammonton, and my daughter was 1990. And so I hear there were some parties there someplace. I don't know.
We had a little bit of fun at the lake.
Yeah, and anyway, after high school, Sam attended Widener University, where he majored in political science. And little did he probably know then that he would end up being the champion of the Board of Education. He's been a member so far for 11 years, 8 years as president. And he probably was never a more difficult time during the time of COVID, I would say, because it was on top of all the other issues you might run into. Yeah, how are you going to do it? You're going to do it Zoom or not Zoom? Anyway, I got to know Sam even better when he was in the family commercial carpeting business, and he made the bold move of buying a blueberry farm. So most of us that joke and attest to that most of blueberry farms that they were just passed on throughout the generations, and Sam took a completely new occupation and has made a real success of it. So anyway, his wife Kathy is here with us tonight, and his son Sam Jr. And so with that, Sam, I'll turn it over to you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parkhurst. And again, I just want to acknowledge my wife and my son Samuel. Unfortunately, my daughter could not be here this evening, but good for her. She's up at University Park, a student at Penn State University, a freshman this year. So eventually, I hope she will have an opportunity to maybe watch this one day on YouTube. Again, I just want to thank Mr. Parkhurst for this opportunity. There aren't many people who probably could have persuaded me into doing something like this, but I've always said I have a tremendous amount of respect for Mr. Parkhurst. He was really key to my success as a farmer in the beginning. I really did lean upon him and would constantly question and try to dig into his knowledge. He had spent so much time there, and actually I was so green to the industry. I didn't even realize he was a salesperson. I just thought he was part of Rutgers Cooperative Extension in the beginning, so I would just be calling him, and then I realized, oh, he works for a company. And I knew, at one point he had his own business, Parker's Farm Supply. But yeah, that's how much knowledge and how much I really did lean on Mr. Parkhurst in the beginning. So I want to thank you personally for that, for the farm, and thank you for having me here this evening. And again, thank you all for coming out this very foggy, dreary evening in Hammonton to give me an audience to tell the history of the Mento family here in Hammonton. Although my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, who like many other immigrants to Hammonton, did not figure personally or prominently into the town history, they too have a story I think is worth telling. And it's an honor to be here tonight to talk about their contributions and ultimately the legacy they left behind here in Hammonton. As you can see right here, my name is actually Salvatore Anthony Mento. I am the third. And just another funny story with that, I mean, from the time I was a little boy, I was always called Sammy. And I just thought my name was Sam, actually, until I was in school, kindergarten, the teacher's doing roll call. Salvatore Mento. I'm just sitting there, and finally she's like, hey, don't be, that's you. I said, no, my name's Sam. But that's how it's always been a name. And I know traditionally in Italian families, Salvatore has been nicknamed to Sam, we also have it to where it's our initials, Salvatore Anthony Mento, Sam. So I am the third, my mother being half English and half German. And then I married a beautiful Irish girl, good Irish girl from Havertown, Pennsylvania. When I looked at my son when he was born, he's just not a Salvatore. So we wound up naming him Samuel Thomas Mento, again, a fourth generation name. And I'm very happy that he was here this evening, and I don't think I could have put this presentation together without him. Okay, let's see if this will work here.
It's all from the side.
Thank you. Benedetto Mento, my great-great-grandfather. He was born in the town of Rometta in the province of Messina in Sicily. It was actually a fortress town in the hill portion of Sicily. And Messina, if you were to look on the map, that would say approximately, is the pointer work on this, or can we get it to go on the TV? Oh, yeah, right around there, on the map of Sicily. His mother, Anna Marie, worked in the cottage silk industry. And out of her home, she worked with silkworms and to produce silk and taught others the art and skill involved in spinning silk, worm silk. His father, my great-great-grandfather, Antonio Mento, was what they classified a simple carpenter, and he also worked at an olive farm near the village. At the young age of 7 years old, my grandfather my great-grandfather's parents, a lot of greats, my great-great-grandparents had secured a job for my great-grandfather, Benedetto, at age 7. He had an opportunity to work for a wealthy family at the Villa Francia. As often was the case when he started, he was just a stable boy, but eventually the owner took a liking to Benedetto as he saw his potential and it expanded his responsibilities. It was here where he eventually worked his way into the house, and he spent some time in the kitchen, and where he learned how to make Italian sponge cake, cannoli, and which later in life here in Hammonton, he very much enjoyed sharing with his family, friends, and children. Okay. Also during his time at the Villa Francia, he learned and took an appreciation for music. At the age of 16, his mother sent my great-grandfather to Italy to go find his older brother who had come to America several years before. And what they had told me about that, he was supposed to come here and earn enough money, his older brother Antonio, to one, repay his mother for the trip to the New World, and two, make enough money to come back with what they called a stake to establish himself back in Sicily. They had lost some contact, they weren't exactly sure where he was, they had a pretty good idea. So my great-grandfather was tasked with going to find his brother in America and bring him back home. He first boarded the ferry for Calabria, and he often would tell this story about his mom when he said goodbye. And, you know, a lot of this tonight, what I'm talking about, and when you talk about history, you know, there definitely is a definitive history when you can look at a deed or a title or, you know, a marriage license. But a lot of it, especially when you're going back over 100 years, it's conjecture, you know. So a lot of this was a oral history given to me, and although it's typed out right now, you know, a lot of it is hearsay. And when there is some definitive, you know, historical information, I'll let that be known. But a lot of this is conjecture. He boarded a ferry for Calabria, which was the first portion of his trip before he boarded the Princess Irene, which was an Italian immigrant ship that actually did run aground in New York. Fortunately, he wasn't on that trip. But on that ferry, the story about my grandfather said about his mother, she, like obviously in the silk industry, was waving goodbye to him with a white handkerchief. And as the ship went further and further, she became smaller and smaller. And all he would see was the white handkerchief. And ultimately, that was the last time he ever did see his mom. He never returned. He did arrive in New York, and I really don't have the history of exactly what happened when he first arrived here in America, but he was a man on a mission, like I had said. He set out looking for his brother, and he had information that his brother was somewhere in the bouts of Altoona, Pennsylvania. He did wind up in Altoona, and he found his brother. He found his brother in very poor mental and financial shape. His brother apparently was unable to manage his finances and was in a deeply depressed state. My great-grandfather, Antonio, encouraged his brother to work together with him. They agreed. They let my great-grandfather control the finances, and they together started working and found lodging in a boarding house. From their earnings, my great-grandfather, Benedito, first repaid his mother for his own trip to America. Then he saved enough money to repay their mother for Antonio's travels to America. They then eventually had enough money for the return of his brother, where he actually did go back to Rametta, and he lived there to a ripe age of 90 years old. So it was good for him to get back to the homeland. There was a boarding house where they stayed, and the boarding house was one of two owned by Giovanni Giordano. That name sounds familiar. He had a daughter. Her name was Domenica Giordano, born in Saporna. I said this wrong 3 times and I practiced it. Saponara, that's it. Saponara, the province of Messina in Sicily in 1893, a very local area to where my great-grandfather was from. So with that boarding house, remember this name, Giovanna Giordano. Well, she was a beautiful woman, and at the time, one of only 3 women who were at the age to be married, and she was the only Sicilian in town. And according to my great-grandfather, she was by far the most beautiful. I'm going to take this because I'm still sweating from setting up the television here. It is a little warm, sorry. So my great-grandfather, obviously had an eye for Domenica Giordano, although there was another suitor who her mother had favored. Again, conjecture, it was told that my great-grandmother, when she went down to the river, her mother would guard her with a gun because there were so many single men at the time, and there was always a concern that one of her suitors would whisk her away. So despite her mother wanting to, her to favor a different suitor, she fell in love with my great-grandfather, Benedito. She fell in love with him for his generosity, his kindness, and just, the connection they had. There were difficulties because of their difference, I guess, in stature. Back in Italy, there were a lot of complications. So rather than try to work it out, they decided to elope. My great-grandfather that night was at the designated spot with a horse, a carriage, and a driver. But Domenica never arrived. So he wasn't sure what was going to happen. The next day, they talked and agreed to try again that night. So since the money had already been spent on the horse, carriage, they had to go about it by foot. Before leaving, Domenica told her younger sister that she was running away. And at first, her sister was angered and was very upset with her and asked her, well, with who? And, well, when my grandmother told her, with Benedito, and this was a written history that my cousin Ben Costa put together along with Maria Costa, and they gave me some good information. I want to give them a credit for this, but in quotes, her sister replied, oh, with Benedito, that's okay. So when Domenica's absence was noticed, her sister waited long enough for the 2 lovers to escape, and she said to her parents, oh, I think she said she was going away. Of course, they asked, with who? Who did she leave with? After she told them, the majority of the family was satisfied, with the exception of Domenica's father. So they had a family meeting, and it's funny, I have some stuff in quote here that I'd like to read, and I hem-hauled whether or not to put it in here, because I know we're in such a different time than it was back then in the early 1800s, or late 1800s, early 1900s. At the urging of his son, they pursued their dad to just cool it off and let it work out. Let's see what happened, because in quote, what will become of her? She has already gone away with a man. She won't be any good anymore. And so were the values back then. So obviously, after some time, there was a reconciliation. And everything was worked out. So right here, I want to show you, this here is a picture of my great-great-grandparents, the Giordano's, along with my grandmother, great-great-grandmother, Dominica, at a later age. And this is her as a child. She was the oldest daughter. If you could see her, the taller woman here in the photograph. You see the two boys are twins. What I did not realize, and it's, I guess I'll go into that part right now. A lot of people have told me that I had relations, I had family that lived on Packard Avenue, that my great-grandmother lived on Packard Avenue. And I'd always say, you don't know what you're talking about. You know, they came to First Road, that's where the homestead was, and that's where I live today. You know, people were off, but as it turns out, as you'll see, this is the wedding picture eventually that they took, my grandfather, great-grandfather, and his wife. And and I'll get to the point about the Hammonton, but back to my grandparents, the love story. It's pretty good, so I want to go back to that. After the urging of her children to let them go, she won't be good anymore, as were the times, the two lovers got away and stayed with Benedito's cousin, and at her family, stayed at Benedito's cousin's family, where they exchanged their vows and were married. Shortly afterwards, the family reconciled and decided to leave for a better life. All of them, my great-grandparents, along with my great-great-grandparents and their families. So quickly, I'll go back to this picture. You'll see the two boys, they're twin boys. Their name was Edward and Leo. And for those of you who may be old enough here, and I don't see anyone here that old, who can remember egg delivery, Ed was Ed, they called Ed the Eggman from Packard Avenue. That was his livelihood. So the entire family relocated here to Hammonton after my great-grandparents eloped. They made up and decided to come to Hammonton. Okay, reconciliation. Starting a new life in Hammonton, the family homestead on North First Road, where now I reside along with my son, who is the 5th generation of our family to have lived there. The story goes with that, my grandfather my great-grandfather entered into a business deal, a proposition to purchase 22-acre lot with 2 other men, along with his father-in-law, helping him, accomplish this. When he arrived, he was pretty disappointed in what the arrangement was, so he decided to have it at it alone, and he dissolved the partnership and got enough money, or borrowed enough money, to go ahead and buy this parcel. And our farm, or his farm back then, the 22-acre parcel, ran from North First Road to Anderson Avenue. If you're on North First Road, there aren't many names there. It's Mento, Calabria, Buckeye. They're all pretty much been there for the last 100 years, and basically we extended from the Calabrias to the Buckeyes, all the way back to Anderson Avenue. And that was his 22-acre farm. At first, he had to clear very heavy brush and wild berries. He turned it into a successful farm, raising sweet potatoes, vegetables, strawberries. And again, no respectable farmer would be without berries. And we call them blackberries today, but they were black diamonds. And they still grow wild in our backyard today, along with asparagus that still grows today every spring. So that's a 100-year-old annual going on behind our house. So my great-grandfather owned and managed and worked his farm the way he felt he had to support his family and to maintain self-respect. With Dominica by his side, he raised 8 children and lived to see all their successes. A story I could tell, again, a little conjecture, for those of you who may remember him, Tony Versace. He had told me a story that he remembered from a kid hearing from my great-grandfather at the time about when he first moved in. And it's funny, and again, we all know Tony Versace, AJV, how he spoke and stuff. And he was explaining this story to me as I was a little boy. So he told me, he's like, well, there was a meeting between your great-grandfather, and he called him the white guy, I guess, before the Italians, he said they met with the white guy, they had a translator. And between the property that my grandfather had bought, there was a very big hedgerow. A bunch of old brush, stuff piled up, just everything, from the neighbor's yard or whatever was just, lying there like a Danish hedgerow. So the owner of the property next door to my grandfather, once he had settled at this meeting, asked him, well, what do you want to do with this here? this isn't mine, this should be your responsibility. So my grandfather answered him in Italian through a translator to the effect that Tony Versace said, you play the music and I'll dance. Whatever you want to do with this, I'll go along with. The next day when he arrived back, the hedgerow was on fire, it was burnt down, and that was the end of the hedgerow. And they were friends for a very long time. So, you know, it's just a nice story to hear something like that, you know, somebody coming here and just, you know, a positive story, because we live in a day and an age now where, you know, neighbors don't always get along, people don't get along at a first meeting. So it was nice that, you know, they took a liking to each other, and that's how things turned out between my great-grandfather and his neighbor. Like I said, he owned and operated, he did his farm, ran it in a way that maintained his self-respect. With Dominica, they got to see the success of all 8 children. Benedito often told his children, if you see people, this is in quotes from my cousin Ben Domenico, if you see people working, and if they ask you for help, pick up a shovel and work with them. If you see people eating, and they ask you to join them, eat with them. And if you ever see people fighting, go the other way. Go the other way. That was what he said. He was not a fighter by any means. Here is a picture of the homestead through the years. I had hoped I could have done a better job finding an older picture of the front of the house from the original building. But as you can see here, this is what the house pretty much looked like when they built it in the early 1900s. Originally, my great-grandfather only wanted a 4-room house, and the carpenters persuaded him to build a 6-room house because of the size of his family, and also the ground on First Road. If anyone has ever lived there or tried to dig a hole, it is hard as a rock. I mean, it is solid clay. So instead of digging down the full 3 feet of foundation like you're supposed to, it was so hard. They assured him that this ground is hard enough. We're going to build you a bigger house, but we're going to cut back a little on the foundation. So that's how he wound up with a nervous condition, one, with the bigger house and a bigger mortgage, and number 2, a house that eventually, you know, they did have to go ahead and put a foundation under and make it more stable. So that's the house there, what it looked like pretty much originally. It was a white house. Those awnings were added on later, the aluminum awning. And then right here is a picture of the house, really that I remember when I was a child. My parents lived there, did some updating, and in addition added the garage. And then eventually, my wife and I in 2015, this is what the house looks like now. We kept with the snow theme just because we had the other one outside, but that's what the house looks like right now. And behind me, I'm still happy to say, I have my cousins, the Domenicos, Josie Domenico, who was my grandfather's sister, and I'm going to get into that whole generation. She still lives behind me along with 2 of her sons. So it's really nice to have that. And here's a picture of the family when they were kids. You can see my great-grandfather Benedito and his wife, and you can see here in this first picture, my Uncle Anthony, Uncle Neen, you have Uncle John, and then Uncle Vince, and their daughter Marie, who was Marie Costa, married Henry Costa. And here they are, you know, a little bit later on in life when they all came into the picture. My grandfather here, Sam, Salvatore, all the way on the left, along with Vince. My great-grandfather, that's Uncle Anthony, the plumber. This is Uncle Joe, and also, Uncle John, and that's Uncle Joe. The women here is my Aunt Marie Costa, Aunt Josie, now Domenico, and finally Lillian Tassone. She married a Tassone. My great-grandmother Dominica eventually passed away a few years before my great-grandfather Benedito did, who died at the age of 84. It was a rather protracted affair. On his deathbed, he had awoken from a coma, and it had been, I don't know, they said 4 or 5 days, something like that, and he woke up like a miracle. And my Aunt Marie said to him, "Pop, we're all here." He woke up, he saw all his kids, and I always get choked up. I said, "Don't get choked up." I joke. I watch the show Survivor, and I say, I always laugh when they cry. I'm like, I always tease them. I think I'm getting a little bit of revenge. But and I'm just going to read through here because, you know, it kind of does choke me up. On his deathbed, after waking up from a coma, his daughter Marie said, "Pop, we're all here." He looked up and said, "You are all my children. don't ever get mad at each other. And his last utterance, he, with his daughter Maria, sang the same Italian folk songs that he sung as a child. The English translator was the comb maker and the woman in the window. And the comb maker was simply like, comb maker, you make all these combs, but you don't have one for yourself. Ba-bum, 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 something like that it went. So that was the end for my grandfather. And my great-grandfather, Benedito, who lived a very fruitful life to the age of 84. And like I said, his wife, Dominica, passed away a few years before him. He did spend his very end of his life in the homestead. So now I'd like to just touch on what I call, the greatest generation. Really, this group of the Mento family, they really put us on the map here in Hammonton. And again, you can see working from left to right, my grandfather Sam, right here, his brother Joe, his brother Vince, you have John, the oldest, Uncle Anthony, affectionately known as Uncle Neen, Aunt Josie, Aunt Lillian, and again, Aunt Marie Costa. Let's see. Okay. I'll start with these two right here. This is my Uncle John and my Uncle Vince. On the left, here they are pictured in Italy. They were both there fighting during World War II. My Uncle John was, he fought in a tank. From what I understand, he was the tank driver, not the commander. He just took, left, right. That was what he operated. And my Uncle Vince was a sort of a staff sergeant. And although back then they didn't have a true Air Force, he was in the Army Air Force. And at the time, he was in Italy working, actually in Sicily, working on building airstrips. So he actually had ran into some of our family who were there, his cousins. And again, he hired them, and he was in charge of hiring the locals, to help build the landing strip. And if you knew my Uncle Vince, he didn't mince words. He was a real man's man. And while in Sicily, he was tasked with having the locals build this landing strip out of the cinder and the ash from the volcanoes. And one of his cousins came up to him, very upset, and started cursing him and giving him a very hard time. And he said, I'm not this type of laborer. I am a die maker. I worked for Fiat. The Americans, you guys blew up the factory. So my Uncle Vince turned to him and said, were you making those dies for Hitler? And he said, yeah. He said, well, you should have been in there when they bombed it, and literally gave him a kick in the behind and fired him on the spot. And this story is, again, conjecture. This story is in the history, the halls of the Historical Society. He wrote his memoirs about it, and he tells the story. And then his commanding officer caught wind of it, and he's like, boy, do you believe that? That guy just fired his cousin. I can't believe it. So this picture here, where they're together in Italy, the story was told, and if you see how my Uncle John is standing beside him, you really can't see his right arm, his right shoulder. Well, word had gotten back to Hammonton that he was injured. He knew, my Uncle Vince and he knew they were both in the same proximity. He was more up north, Uncle John. My grandpapa always teased my Uncle Vince, said that he never had a hard job. So even in the Army, he was on the back lines taking care of business. But my Uncle John, he was on the front lines fighting it out in the tank. So he had heard that he was injured. My Uncle Vince, being the type of person he was, commandeered a Jeep and went to the front line to find his brother. He found his brother out of the hospital, and the first thing my Uncle John said to him, what the heck are you doing here? Probably a few other adjectives. Get out of here. You're not going to make it. Get back. I'm okay. So he's like, we got to get a picture together. Mom is very upset, blah, 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 blah. So they got this picture taken, and that was the only one I had. But if I were able to locate the full picture, I mean, you can see in the background here, the bombed out building. To the left, there was a wall that was falling down. I mean, they were literally right there at the front line. So they took that picture. My Uncle Vince was able to get word back, and back then, unlike today with the internet and stuff, it took quite a while to get back. So when the picture got back, they were very unsatisfied, to say the least. My great-grandmother was very upset. She thought that my Uncle John had lost his arm, or something happened to his arm, and that's why he was standing like that. So even when he went and found him and told him he was all right, their mother was still very, very upset. And eventually they got back home, and this is a picture of them back in the States, actually at the homestead in their dress fatigues. So, yeah, those two were the two who served in the military during World War II. The touchback, I'd like to just give all of them their due. Many of you know my Uncle Anthony, or knew my Uncle Anthony, a very kind and gentle person. He attended, my grandfather, who was much younger than him, attended the same trade school where my Uncle Anthony had attended. And all the instructor ever told my grandfather was, "You'll never be as good as a mechanic as your brother." He was by far his favorite student. He had a lot of his projects mounted on the wall, and he really was a star pupil and came out and really was a fantastic plumber here in Hammonton. He helped a lot of people, and he had a very successful business for a long time until he eventually closed and sold the building, which he owned, and had his material on Front Street to my father. And I'll get to that in a little bit. Beside my Uncle Anthony is my Uncle John, who made a living in the garment factory around town. He was a suit cutter. My Uncle Vince, again, who we jokingly say never had a hard job. He was a manager over, or supervisor at Kessler Suits. He had a nice job there. My grandfather's brother, who was my great Uncle Joe, he worked in the Sears and Roebuck downtown for a very long time. And a lot of people would often confuse him with my grandfather. He spent a lot of time there, and then eventually he went to another department store, but it wasn't like I guess it was changing from the order type form to more of a retail store, something like a Bradley's or something like that in Clementon, and that's where he finished his career. Next to my Uncle Anthony, you'll see my Aunt Josie, the youngest of all the daughters. She married Charles Domenico, a world-class mechanic. They went on to have 4 boys, all the Domenico boys. I'm sure many of you know them. That's my Aunt Lillian beside her, who married a Tassone, had a couple sons. Her son also was an electrician for a little bit, Bobby Tassone. And then all the way to the left is my Aunt Marie Costa, who married Henry Costa, who was the owner-operator of the Coastal Pants garment factory right there on Pratt Street. Actually, that's where they met. She had a job there, and he was the owner and manager, and they hit it off. So that's what I call the greatest generation right there of the Mento family. Okay. That. And you probably don't recognize him with all that hair, but that's my grandfather, the original Salvatore Mento Sr., when he was young and first started out. My grandfather, as you know, he started the family business. Back then, it was called, and there's a picture of my grandfather and how I remember him, and my grandmother Helen. Helen, she was a very athletic, very fit person in her youth. She did develop, what we know now as lupus, but back then people really didn't know exactly what lupus was. So she would be healthy, and then the next day she would be deathly sick, and almost to the point where people thought she might have been a hypochondriac, where they really didn't understand what was going on, and she wound up passing away in her 60s. And my grandfather lived on to his mid-80s, but he started the family business, and like every how it all starts here with first generation creates. So this is the business my grandfather created, Sam Mento and Sons Floor Covering. He started out working for Leon Ruba here in town. Ruba's Furniture, I think it was 7 floor, or how many, 16 stories, but only 5 stories high, something like that, department store. He was an installer along with Frank Mazza. Frank Mazza Jr., who eventually he and my grandfather went into a partnership in just floor covering business. They worked together for some time, and then eventually they went their separate ways. My grandfather wanting to have his own business, and Frank wanting to do more than just flooring. He also wanted to do the furniture. So out of his garage, he started the business with my grandmother, and then eventually my son were involved. My grandfather kind of cut his teeth around town working with, back in the day, carpeting was just more area rugs. Most of the rooms were hardwood floor, And, an installer would go out there and basically with the tacks in their mouth, they would take the tack and just tack around that carpet and put it down there. Eventually, times had changed and they called what they called wall-to-wall carpet. That's when you would do the entire house. And that's when, my grandfather probably made his money. His first contract, and it was a pretty lengthy contract, the building, was down in Mystic Islands. He did a lot of work there on the lagoon houses, basically did all of them for over a decade. He spent time working there. Again, they were just digging out lagoons and building houses. That's pre-Pine Lands, pre-EPA and all that stuff. Eventually they kind of curtailed that digging out of and making lagoons. And so they started building a little more inland. And really that Mystic Island job ran until probably the late 70s. I actually remember taking some trips down there with my father and helping out, being his pad and tackless man. So second generation incorporates. My father then took the business, our floor covering business, to the next step. He incorporated and he purchased the first real storefront and warehouse. He bought this building from my Uncle Anthony on, what's it called, the one-way street there, Front Street. My Uncle Anthony had owned it. He had used it as storage, and a warehouse for his business, and he helped my dad and sold him that first building. It was, I think it was Ann's Hairdresser was there, the storefront, and he had a couple apartments there too. And that's where, he really got his footing going in the floor covering business. My dad did get lucky and land a very nice contract with K. Hammonton, who built all those houses out by Stockton there in the Galloway area. Again, he spent probably 15, 18 years working for them. And he started out on Front Street where I would always be there, rolling out the carpet and cutting it for him. And it's the funny things that you remember, but I do remember the first day we got a forklift. And it was probably the happiest day of my life because up until then I was the forklift. So he purchased a forklift and things were getting better for us. My dad eventually outgrew that spot. He sold that and he purchased a building from Gus, where he had the lawnmower repair shop on 3rd Street, where really the store is still today. Although my dad really isn't doing any work anymore, he still has the warehouse, and that's where he houses a bunch of his old collectible cars, and he likes to just go sit out there and take a look at it. So, yeah, my grandfather started with the Mystic Islands, and my dad really did take it to the next level. I, like Mr. Parker said, went to school. When I first graduated, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do with myself, and there was no question my dad getting the truck, And the next day I was working with him. Like I said, we had a very nice run with the Hammonton, but like anything else, all good things do come to an end. That job ended, and we found ourselves in between jobs, trying to figure out, if you remember the economy in the early 90s, it was a little bit shaky, and we were trying to figure out what direction or which way we would like to go. Let me grab this drink real quick. Thank you. That's when my dad decided to start looking into more commercial work. Like I said, we were slow at the time, and I was a member of the union. So one day we got the union had given my father a call and said, hey, how busy is your son? Do you need him? We have a 3-day job with this company. They used to do only ceramic tile, filling marble and tile, but they've gotten into carpet pretty heavy. They're doing a lot of casino work, and they need help. Is he a mechanic? What do you rate him in? And he was honest. He's like, no, he's definitely not a mechanic, but he might be able to fake it. He said, you can send him out there. So they sent me out for a 3-day job, and as fate would have it, I wound up working for that company for 2 years straight, pretty much around the clock. I moved to Margate. I was living down there. I was working, and basically I knew the back entry to every casino in the city, and I pretty much had unlimited hours, as much as I wanted. I did pretty good, and as a young man, you don't realize, you're not going to be young forever, and eventually that back's going to tighten up, and you're not going to be as strong or so inclined to get down and do all the hard work that they had me doing as a young guy on the job. But that was a nice run, and eventually that business decided not to stick with the carpeting, and they just went back to the tile industry. And meanwhile, if we had time, I would always help my dad on weekends, or we would do a residential job. My brother was getting a little involved. And we felt confident enough that we could start getting into commercial work. Although my dad and mom and my grandfather still being alive, not really part of the business, it was very reluctant to get into the casinos and deal with the likes of Donald Trump and all these other things. And I'm sure you heard a lot of the disaster stories about contractors who did work in the casinos in the early 80s, you know, maybe getting paid 10, 20 cents on the dollar. But the money opened up here in the state, the SAC money, the matching funding for schools, and that's where we got involved. We hooked up with a couple nice businesses, Roland Anderstone, Ogren Construction, Art Anderson Construction, and between those three, they kept us more than gainfully employed. We worked as much as we could take. That's a picture right there of my dad as a little boy, along with his cousin Marie Costa, with my great-grandparents there. They both got their first Holy Communion on the same day. So there's a picture of my dad when he was young. And there's my mom and dad and myself here as a little boy here, very happy. And I think I already had a little experience in floor covering at that point in my life during that picture. A new direction. I found myself, you know, a little concerned. I was married with children in late 2007. People were starting to say, you know, we feel like there's a recession coming. We're going into a recession. And it's funny because when you're in the floor covering business, you have a keen ability to look into the future, because when you're bidding some new work, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's typically, you know, 2 or 3 years, sometimes 3 years from now, because they have to build the whole building and you're pretty much the last guys in there. So we were seeing the work, well, the SAC money was cut off when Chris Christie got into office. There was no more matching funding, so it cut a lot of the school work. There was a saying back then when I was working in Atlantic City that when times are good, the casinos do good. When times are bad, the casinos do better because people gamble even more. Well, in 2008, during the Great Recession, we found that not to be true. So back here we are, the end of 2007. It was actually election day. And I found myself driving around with Pat Casaria. We were going around checking out the different poll stops, and he had told me a story about his son who had taken a look at a farm. He decided to pass on the farm. His son was a little bit younger than me. Wasn't sure if he was able to take off that type of, you know, he didn't want to take on that type of debt. And his father, I don't think, really wanted to have to leverage all he had. So I understood that. He explained to me the details. And I said to myself, I said, wow, that doesn't sound that bad. And again, being concerned about what my future, you know, held with the floor covering business, the next day I just took a ride out to the farm. And it was beautiful. I pulled out there, the foliage was turning color. I pulled to the back of the farm, and I would never just like go into someone's property or trespass. I have a tremendous amount of respect for property and stuff like that. But just that day, I had heard it was for sale. So I pulled in, very unlike me, and I just was taken over how beautiful it looked. The foliage, there were wild turkey as I pulled to the back, a couple deer. I mean, I think I even heard the sound of music in the background. It was just beautiful. And so I went around the block and I said, okay, I think I've seen enough here. I head out and I pull in the street, and who pulls in? The farmer. I was like, oh no. So this guy, he is Frank Jacobs. And a little background on that, his father, Carmen Jacobs, really was a farmer. He started out as a truck farmer, just like everyone else, and eventually transitioned into blueberries. His health began to fail. Frank, being a school teacher, always stayed and helped in the summer, and you know, like people joke, blueberry farmers only work a couple months a year. So he was able to go ahead and continue teaching in Atlantic City and keep the farm going for another year or so, but he wanted out, he wanted to sell. So as he's pulling in, I'm pulling out. I rolled out my window and very, very, very sheepishly, I said, oh, I'm sorry, I heard this farm was for sale. And, you know, he just shook his head and he told me, well, look, it's under contract. I have a couple other guys on the list, but if you want to give me your name, you know, I'll let's go up here, I'll write it down and I'll give you a call. And by then, you know, by the time we got it, we looked at each other, I actually recognized him. We had done some work in his house, so we did play a little bit of a name game. So this is where I jokingly tell people I bought this farm by mistake, because if he hadn't pulled in that day, there was no way I ever would have tried to pursue something like that. So I gave him my information, and he said, you know, thanks, but I think this is already sold. See you later. Again, people talking about economy faltering. We go through the holiday season. Next thing I know, early February, if you remember the year now, 2008, the great crash was around April, I think, or late March. The crash was maybe a little bit. It started going down, at least in February, and I'll tell you why I remember that. So I get the call in mid-February from Frank Jacobs. I answer, it's a 561 number. Hello, Sam? Yes, hi, this is Frank Jacobs. Oh, hi, Frank. Sam, I really wish I wasn't calling you right now, he said, and the farm was already sold, but I told you that, you know, you were on a list, and if it came down to you, I would give you an opportunity to purchase the farm. Are you still interested? Again, I just didn't want him to make him mad at me for trespassing. I said, yeah, I'm interested. Let me take a look. He said, when do you want to get together? I said, well, let's meet up tomorrow, 7 a.m. So we met there the next day at 7 a.m. and he gave me a quick tour. And honestly, I didn't know what I was looking at. I probably spent more time looking at the carpentry and stuff in the packing house than I did really at the plants. And he kind of said, no, like, this is what you're buying. Don't worry about this stuff. This is not this. This is what you're buying. This is what you want to see out here, these plants. So we talked about it. He told me the price. I told him, I said, you know, I don't know anything really about farming. I'm not sure. And he said, well, you know, your father taught you how to do flooring. I'm a teacher. I'll stay and I'll teach you. I'll teach you the same way your dad taught you about flooring. I said, okay. So now the next challenge was to tell my father. And if anybody knows my dad, you know, he's a guy who, before you can even finish the sentence, he says no at least 3 or 4 times. You know, no. So I explained to him, I said, hey, you know, we used to have like dinners on Wednesday night over my parents' house. He would have the whole family over when the kids were little. And so I just said, hey, you know, you're not going to believe this call I got today. Frank Jacobs called me, you know, that farm is still for sale, blah, 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 blah. My father, you know, didn't say much. He said, he looked at me, said, get it. I said, what? He said, buy it. I was like, are you serious? You know, he said, yeah, get it. I said, it's going to be a lot of money. He says, whatever it takes, get that farm. So again, here I am trying to secure a loan now for well over $1 million, you know, with no experience, you know, pretty good credit, but not that much money to, you know, to go ahead and get that type of loan. So the first opportunity I took, or the first time I met with a banker, was I met with a man from Ocean City Bank, someone I had no affiliation with. And, you know, I went there, I spoke to him, I told him, you know, what my plans were and everything. And he basically just laughed me out of the place, like, get out of here, you know, laughed. There's no way, you know, you can't do it. So then talking to some other people and some of my friends at the Never There Gunny Club, where, you know, Joe's dad's a member, and some other people, it was it was before the Never There Gunny Club, for those of you know, has a spaghetti dinner twice a year. We always have it the Friday before Election Day and Good Friday. It was Good Friday. It was early that year in March. So I started talking to some people down there about it, and they told me, no, you have to go to Farm Credit. That's the bank where you're going to go to borrow money for the farm. So having learned from my mistakes with the first bank, I took a ride along with my father to go see, you know, the lender there, Craig Mulberry, an older guy there at Farm Credit Bank. And, you know, I pretty much put out my case, you know, and I remember my dad's like just telling me, like, you know, easy, calm down. And, you know, I explained to him I had a plan, how I had benefits banked up, and, you know, what I wanted to do. And he gave us a loan. You know, and the rest is really history. My parents did, you know, I can't say a bad thing about them with the farm. They did help me out. I was fortunate enough that first year to earn enough money to go ahead and repay them the substantial amount of money that they had given me for a down payment, paid them off that first year. And when I did that, I basically used every penny plus I had made that year and said, well, that's okay. I'll make this kind of money next year too. I'll be fine. Plus, I'll do the floor covering. Boy, was I wrong. By the end of the summer, the stock market was halved. You know, the casinos were shuttered. You know, Atlantic County had the highest unemployment, I think, in the country. And I quickly realized, this is all I have. This business there's not enough for 3 families. That would be my father, my brother, and myself at the carpet store. And, you know, that's when I realized this is what I'm going to do. My dad and brother, you know, continued the business for another year. And, you know, actually jokingly, he says, I probably kept it open a year too long. But if anyone knows about corporations and S corporations, it's a very lengthy process trying to get out of a corporation. So just that last year trying to wind down, you know, he wished he could have probably done that a year before. So here's a picture of my son and I the first year back in 2008 when I bought the farm. Again, I didn't know much, and I knew John Deere. That was it. But, you know, back to the farm and Frank Jacobs. Again, I can't say enough good about that man. He really did go above and beyond. And in order for me to be able to get the loan, contractually, I had to have Frank agree to sign up for the first year, basically to run the farm and mentor me. And then the next 2 years agreed to be a consultant to the farm. And we had, you know, it stipulated per hour, you know, how many hours and everything. But again, contracts are made to be broken. And Frank certainly did not break, you know, his part of the deal. He upheld his end and even beyond. He really did teach me everything I needed to know. And those first 3 years, I didn't change a thing. I did everything exactly how he did it. And a lot of times I would be doing something or going to a valve, and it wouldn't make much sense to me, like why they do it this way. And it took me all of 3 years to figure out, oh, you know, and I very often, you know, after Frank left and I was by myself doing things, that I would have that light bulb moment where, oh, I get it. Now I understand why they have these two zones together, because the ground is this way. Or, you know, his father, Carmen Jacobs, who laid out the farm, he really did a really nice job, and he set that farm up for a one-man, a one-family farm operation, and that's what it is today. So I enjoy, I have the privilege of working alongside my wife on the packing line in the summers now. I affectionately call her Inspector Number 14. She watches every pint of blueberries that goes by that line, and if she does not like it, I'll tell you, she has the fastest hands. She'll either take out that imperfect berry or pull it off the line quickly and get it ready to go. So it looks great. I'm very proud to say, you know, in an age of conglomerates and consolidation, we still are, and I don't know how long we will be, but we still are an independent label farm. That is, you know, everything we grow and pack has our name on it. We still sell, you know, everything is Mento Farms. Mento Farms is the brand that comes out of there. We have a middleman who really was selling the farm prior to my purchase, Bill Vaccaro. His father, Ross Vaccaro, again, I started with him. And he was a great mentor to me. He taught me about the business, taught me the importance about reputation, and yeah, it's been pretty good ever since. Right here, we just have a picture, you know, of our blueberries here, the famous blue crop, and on the right side here, this past summer, we had a visit from the New Jersey Secretary of Agriculture, Doug Fisher, came down along with some people from the news, and every year he likes to visit a local farm and give us a plug and push locally grown Jersey fresh fruits and berries. And that's my daughter, who couldn't be here tonight, on the right, Sarah. She's at Penn State. Okay, I guess that's it for the earning part of my life. Now let's talk about my volunteerism. As you know, public service, I was elected to the Hammonton Board of Education in 2011. I'm currently in my fourth term as a board member. I was elected president at the beginning of my second term, and this is the 8th year of my presidency. There's a picture from this year in the school, and just to add on to what Mr. Parker said, school board could be some of the most challenging and at the same time some of the most rewarding things a person could do. You know, a volunteer, a job somebody can do. These last few years have been difficult, but I am very proud to say that at the school, we were one of the first districts to go back in person. We went back to school 2020 September for in-person education, and we then resumed full-time classes, and we were fortunate enough to get through this year thus far, all in school, in person, without virtual learning, with the exception if a student were quarantined or had COVID, they would be provided a password and be able to learn virtually. And we are one of the few districts that offered that in all of South Jersey. The majority of them would just give out a packet. So that's something I'm very proud of, that we kept the doors open And, you know, I was recently quoted in the paper, that is our goal, to keep the doors open. And we want to keep educating our children here in Hammonton, giving them the first-class education they deserve, but at the same time being cognizant that, you know, we have to do that at a price that our taxpayers can afford. So that's my volunteer part of the school board. And then finally, here's a picture of my entire family together at a wedding this year, post-Blueberry. We're all nice and slim, you know, we knocked off that winter weight. And that's the family there. I included a picture here. If you want to, this is, I know I pretty much told the story of the Mento family, starting with my great-grandfather, because I know I tried to set it, you know, in a fashion that, you know, it was the Mento family here in Hammonton. But if you follow back, this chart starts with my son and daughter, and you can see my father, grandfather, and my mom's parents over here. And then following the Mento side, we trace back to my great-grandfather, his father, Benedito Mento, and then we take that back to Giuseppe Mento, which was my great-great-great-grandfather. All, again, Rometta, say that they didn't go far, and we were able to take it back one more push back to, we have a date of birth for 1777 for Francisco Mento, who married Katherine Polito. And if you go the other way on my grandmom's side, with my great-grandmother's side, which I don't have on here, you would see a lot of familiar names from Hammonton, Gazzara, Giordano. So yeah, that's pretty much the family tree. And when we're talking about trees, I think I would be remiss if I did not include a picture of this tree and just talk a little bit. This is a picture of my backyard, very long time ago, probably when I was a little boy. And if you see that oak tree, that was the only tree that my great-grandfather did not clear. It's a very, very large white oak. And right here in this picture, it hadn't quite developed the beautiful crown that it has now. But a couple funny stories about this tree. One, I had it checked out not too long ago. I thought it may have been hit by lightning, and I had a arborist come out, someone from the state. He did some measurements, and he told me, believe it or not, this oak tree is the third largest white oak in New Jersey. And he said that the two others are in very bad shape right now. And how they calculate the size of a tree is they measure it, he joked, he said the waist, because they don't want to bend over, at 4 foot high. So you don't put the tape around the base where it's very wide. You take the official circumference at 4 feet high, and the circumference of that tree is 22 feet right now, the base. Now this picture doesn't do it justice, but if you could, this is 50 years ago now too. If you see that tire right there, you can tell, you can see the size of the tree. So underneath that tree, that's where my great-grandfather and his children would do their packing and everything like that. That tree's been in our family, you know, since the beginning. Right now, it has, if you were to take the radius of the full spread, it's over 100 feet from end to end. And each one of these limbs that you see protruding out really parallel to the ground are larger than most oak trees in the area, you know, with a circumference of probably 5 or 6 feet. We did lose a pretty substantial part on the right side here in September, I think, of 2016. It was a very wet year, and believe it or not, out of all the, you know, things that would take down this tree, I think it was water saturation. It was just so wet. And on the right side, it was early in the morning, and I actually heard it. I just, like a tremendous groan and a crack. And boom, I looked out. I did not see it fall, but I caught the bounce. And yeah, this whole third came down. So before that, though, it was over 100 feet in radius from width to width. So that's something that was part of our family. And you know, we always joked, like, why didn't you take this? It's like, who was going to take that tree down? And it's been there, and we've had family reunions. We had our engagement party, and we've spent a lot of time, the Mento family, underneath that tree for the last 100 years. So I felt that would be a fitting picture to end this presentation with. And, you know, I've never been the most polished speaker or talented, you know, orator. I hope, you know, I gave you guys your money's worth tonight. I really did try. I know I'm not the best, but I thank you for coming out and giving me this opportunity. Thanks. Thank you.
Sam.
Yeah.
I just want to add that you are, since the inception of our speakers program, that you are our 99th speaker.
All right.
And I've been to all of them, and you're one of the best.
Thank you.
And
Thank you very much. I try.
We had education, and we had history, and we had adventure, and we had romance.
Romance.
So thank you very much, Sam, to you and to your family.
Thank
It was
you.
wonderful.
Thank you. Are there any questions? From what I understand, I might have a cousin here
Yes,
tonight.
yes.
Let's
we,
play the name game. Go ahead.
Okay, well, my last name is Sanfrani.
Okay.
I'm told my mother, who was, her name was Jenny Merlino, is her maiden name,
Mm-hmm.
and your grandfather were cousins.
Okay.
I'm told that now.
Okay. Merlino and Mento.
Yeah,
Okay.
And my grandfather was Pietro Merlino. They lived in Audubon most of their life. Well, they lived in Camden. They had a little store in Camden, and then they moved to Audubon. And that's about it. I saw the ad in the little paper, so I said, well, I have to go see if I related to any of these people.
There is a high probability because my grandfather's brothers, John and Joe, moved to Audubon.
Did Joe work at Corvettes, maybe?
I think that's where he made.
Because I worked with him when I was a kid.
Okay. I
I
know.
used to
I
get
know he
sodas
did a
for
long
him. He used
run
to
at
bribe me.
Sears, but it's. I'm sorry.
He used to bribe me. I was a janitor when I got out of high school, part-time job, and he was in appliances.
Okay.
He sold appliances.
Yeah,
and he
and
would
eventually
say,
sold at Sears.
"Hey
Yeah.
Ted, run down and get me a Coke at the little coffee shop," and I would, and you know. But other than that, we just said hello because he was a lot older than me, naturally, you know. And when you're a kid, that you don't care about that stuff. You know?
Yeah.
And how about Benny Costa?
Benny Costa, yes. Well, his mom was Marie Mento, who married Henry Costa from
Okay.
the coastal or coastline pants
Okay.
factory.
Because he
Yeah.
contacted me a few years ago,
Mhm.
emailed me about something, and he said he researched the family. He had a lot of
Well, that's where
information.
a lot of the story.
Yeah, and he said, I'll email it to you. Give me your email. That's the last I ever heard of him. So,
Yeah, Ben's not in great health right now.
Oh, okay.
Actually, he's in a unfortunately in assisted living, but he did put a lot of time in, and he was the one who did, you know, the research and the quotes that I told about, you know,
Yeah.
my grandmother being guarded with great grandmother being guarded with a shotgun, and
Yeah.
the whole story about that. He was the one who put the time in, and he also did the lineage for us too.
Right.
And
and
yeah,
my wife, Bissy, she's also Irish, so what can I say, you know?
there you go.
Did you ever hear of a woman named Josephine Costa? She was a nurse anesthetist. Were she alive now, she'd be 100 probably.
It's
She lived in
possible.
Hammonton. I worked with her, and I knew she lived in Hammonton, but I
Yeah,
never.
I'm not sure. She could have been my uncle Henry Costa's. Well, no, I guess she would have married a Costa. Well,
No,
his
she
bro-
was her maid. She was never married.
Oh, she was never married.
No, Costa was her.
Not Marie Costa.
Josephine.
Oh, Josephine. Okay.
And there was
because
an
my-
Aunt Josephine somewhere in that, which was.
Yeah.
kind
Well,
of-
Aunt Josephine's Mento, yeah, and there's
Yeah.
Marie Costa and her daughter who never married. Little Marie, we call her Costa. So
That's either her or her sister, because one of them had a daughter who Josephine like spoiled senseless because she didn't have any children of her own.
okay,
Might be
yeah,
that.
it's very possible.
Yeah.
It's very possible. Small
Very
world.
interesting,
And
yeah.
where are you? Are you guys still in Audubon?
No, right now we live in Williamstown. We just
Okay.
moved, we lived in Iowa Crest for the last 15 years or so, and
Mhm.
now we're both retired, and we moved to an over 55 community in Williamstown. And we're always in Hammonton now, because, you know, we love all the
Why not?
restaurants.
It's a great
and-
town.
yeah.
Good food.
Yeah, we live 8 minutes away, probably 10 minutes at the most.
That was nice you came tonight though for this.
Oh, yeah, it was
Yeah.
great. Like I said, I saw the ad in the little paper, and I said, wow.
There you go. Right. It's
Yeah,
not that
very
often
good.
you get to hear about the Mento.
No,
family.
that was a great presentation. Thank you. That was very good.
Thanks. I tried.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
good.
Are there any other?
Sammy, about Jack and John Giordano, the junkyard guys? Are they related to you?
Jack and John Giordano. I'm not positive,
Yeah,
but
in Anderson Avenue, they had a junkyard,
okay.
and he was a councilman. He was a
Okay.
councilman, Jack Giordano.
There's a high probability because well, we'll go back. Yeah, when my great grandmother's family also came to Hammonton, right here. It was a large family, so there were quite a few Giordano's. So maybe not one of those per se in the picture, but it could have been one of the twins, either Ed, or Leo's sons. And it was right there by where the farm was. Who knows? There could even have been a relation where that could have been part of the farm at one point. But to the best of my knowledge, the farm ended where that junkyard was. That was the cut at Anderson Avenue to North First Road. I don't think it crossed over. And that's the junkyard you're talking about, right? That goes to 13th Street.
Now Bobby Cap owns that property.
Yeah, it's most likely it's probably one of the descendants of either Ed or Leo, who both grew up in Hammonton.
How do you tell them?
Go ahead.
Oh, that picture on the left, I have that same picture. It
Do
was
you?
in my grandmother's stuff. Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
creepy here. It's getting. It's the exact same picture. Yeah.
Yeah, in Messina. Yeah, that was an
yeah.
That's neat.
It's like I said, we just moved a year ago, and I just remember seeing it. Of course. I have no idea where it's at in the second. But yeah, so that's odd. Yeah.
Yeah, we could do. What did you say, Anthony? Well, there's.
Was it Anthony Mento married a lady named Mary?
Yeah, well, yes, that was my uncle Anthony, the plumber, who married Mary Vaccarella, I believe was her last name. Yeah.
My dad's cousin.
No kidding. Yeah, just
She
when you
was a
think you're not
sweet
related.
woman. She was a
Yeah,
lovely
she was a great person. They actually had a house right here on the lake,
Yes.
and I kept a boat there. And my Aunt Mary, or my great Aunt Mary, who was married, Uncle Anthony, I called him Uncle Neen. That was just his name. Affectionately called him Uncle Neen.
Yeah.
She died of a broken heart. Really, after he passed away, she didn't make it much longer. They were truly in love.
She'd been to my house several times to visit my parents. She was a lovely lady.
Yeah, she really was a nice person. Her high-pitched voice. Like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. I remember. Yeah, good stuff. Any other connections here?
My son-in-law is Jim Mento.
Okay, Jim Mento, Vince, I guess, right? Your son.
See, I wish Frank were here because I don't know enough, but he worked for the down the road, the tractor place.
Jim.
His mother was Linda Mento.
Linda.
Yeah.
Well, they were
She
my.
passed away.
I grew up next door to them. I again. Well, if you see the picture, let's see if we can get back to the picture of my house. Yeah, right here. If our house here, originally it was a farm, and like I said, I have my cousins behind me still, but beside me to the right was where Jason, Jimmy, and their younger brother Jonathan, who his name was Vince actually, but he went by Jim, who was the war hero, Vince's son. He grew up right next door, and actually on the other side of me was my grandparents. So it was pretty cool, although they did not farm.
Is he a relation?
Second cousins.
He was my dad's first cousin. Jim Mento, the father, was my Uncle Anthony and my grandfather. They're brothers. That's my father and Vince, and then us. So it makes us like, what's that, first cousin once removed or something like that? Second cousins.
Sam and Vince were
First
brothers.
cousins.
No.
Sam and Vince were first cousins.
Yeah.
Oh, my
Your
grandfather.
and Vince were brothers.
Right.
So your fathers are first cousins. So
Right.
you and Jim and Jonathan and Jason are second cousins.
Second cousins. Okay. There you go. Yeah, he was my
And
second
Vince's
cousin.
wife Mary was the one who made the legendary cakes.
Yes, she did. And while I'm glad you brought that. And there was a little bit of, and I wasn't 100% sure, so I wasn't going to mention it. But actually, lately there's been a little buzz on Facebook about her recipe, and it's been shared a little bit. And I found it very interesting that it was my great grandfather who learned at the Villa Francia, about making Italian sponge cake and cannoli and stuff like that. So although I don't know, where exactly that recipe came from, I'm sure my great grandfather had a little input on those cakes because, wow, she did a fantastic job, and that was really a big part of my childhood. Every family party or occasion, we had an Aunt Mary's cake. Yeah. So, and like I said, that generation, like I called the greatest generation, that's really the group that put us on the map here in Hammonton. I'm still here. My cousin AJ Mento still lives here in town. His brother Michael, he's down in Moorgate, but he spends a lot of time here in Hammonton. And I'm trying to think. Anthony's daughter, Minetta. She married Anthony Pino.
Right.
His daughter, their daughter, Nadine, who's a counselor at the school. She's still in Hammonton. Her last name's Ryan.
Yeah.
And her sister, Valerie, Sherio is her name now. She's also still in town.
Right. I grew up with Anthony.
Okay.
We were the same age.
Pino or Mento?
Mento.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Do you farm at the homestead? Because the homestead and then where you have your blueberry farm are two different locations.
Yeah,
right?
good question. Very close in proximity. The farm here now, well, the old homestead has been developed, and like I said, mostly by family, where all my cousins at one point were all my neighbors. You know, since then, some of the houses have been sold. And my grandfather passed on, but my farm is about right now less than 2 miles from my house on 14th Street. If you're familiar, if you go over the Expressway Bridge towards Folsom, actually the driveway of the farm is a divider line between Folsom and Hammonton. South side Folsom, left side, north side Hammonton. It's Paper Road, third road, is the driveway, actually. So right there, yeah, pretty close. And that was another one.
Are you farming at the homestead? Are you still?
No. I mean, we have about 2 acres on the property, but there's not. I mean, I had a garden there, but not any real production ag, you know. And now, you know, the farm that I bought from Frank Jacobs, that's just over 53 acres. So I'm about 50 acres there. And then in 2012, I purchased another 25 acres. And I put an additional about 5 acres of blueberries in there. So that's the total of my farm. And comparatively speaking, it's a very small farm. I mean, compared to some of the big boys who are, you know, 900, 1,000 acres. Just enough for one family, I think, to get through it. Okay, go ahead.
I heard you, sorry, I'm Sean, probably a new face for everybody here with the Gazette, but I just wanted to say, you know, you mentioned Margate, your brother's down there now. I grew up, you know, going to summers in Margate. My grandmother's down there and whatnot. Just a personal question of how do you like it down there when you were, you know, working down there and whatnot?
Oh, I had a great time in Margate. I mean, I had a boat at Captain Andy's, and I met my wife at Maloney's. So.
Did you really? I know
Yeah.
so many people that married.
Yeah.
I know.
Sam,
Yeah.
you're on First Road, right?
North
And
First
your
Road,
property goes back to Anderson Avenue,
The farm did go back to Anderson,
but
yes.
you still own that.
No. My property now. Well, what happened? My grandfather's sister, Josephine, she has a large portion where she has from. It would be north of Chew Road is no longer in the family, but from Chew Road to First Road, the Dominicos have that back portion that goes halfway. And as you know, like with the diagonal part of Chew Road, it's pretty deep.
Right, but the property that goes from First Road to Anderson, that's not yours?
No, not anymore. No, there's a bunch of houses developed on there now.
First Road to Anderson, because then back on 13th Street, those houses go way back also.
They do.
And there's a winery back there. Well, a man that grows grapes.
Mhm.
He's not living now, but they all farmed back there.
Yeah, it's still pretty rural.
Yeah.
That part of that neck of town. I call it that side of town, which is that side of the tracks.
That side of
Right,
town.
but if you quartered the town, that side of town more to the east, those guys kind of continue to farm. The Bernados, the Willermans, they're still really in big ag production. It seemed more on my corner of the town. It started becoming more and more residential. I think it's zoned to R2, but the lots there are tremendously deep. We go, you know, from First Road, my property goes back nearly 700 feet. And then, you know, my Aunt Josie probably has another 2,000 feet from Chew Road back to my property on First Road.
But that is the other side of town.
Yeah, definitely very different from this side of town.
And my friend is Ruth Ferrigno.
Okay.
Doesn't she have your partners?
Ruth is my neighbor.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've eaten some of your berries.
Okay. Good stuff. I think I have a couple rows on the property too, actually. I do. A few rows. Any?
Oh, really? No kidding.
And that's where Atlantic City.
I think that's it, right? All right, thank you.